In the quiet of a suburban afternoon, I was about to learn something that would change everything. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect, no dramatic confessions or wild confrontations. It was something more fragile, something my son had been carrying around for longer than I could have imagined. He came back home that day with a truth so heavy he could no longer keep it to himself. I didn't know how this conversation would unfold or how it would shift the ground beneath us, but I knew it would be a moment neither of us would ever forget. This is the story of the afternoon my son returned with a truth he could no longer carry. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or your own story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs lazily in the sky, casting long shadows over everything. I was sitting by the kitchen window, doing the same thing I'd done 1,000 times before, stirring my coffee, listening to the soft hum of the house around me. My son, Nathan, had just turned 25, and for the most part, we'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. There were no more of those terrible teenage years full of fighting, no more worries about him staying out late or running with the wrong crowd. He was a grown man now, and he seemed to have found his place in the world. At least, that's what I thought. But when I heard the front door creak open, my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting Nathan home so early. He'd been staying at his apartment downtown more and more, and I'd gotten used to the quiet of the house without him. So when I heard that familiar sound, I knew something was off. It wasn't just a casual visit. I got up, wiped my hands on the towel, and walked toward the hallway. As I approached the living room, I saw him standing there by the door, looking hesitant, as if he was trying to find the right words. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders a little hunched. I had this odd sense that he wasn't just here to chat or drop off his laundry. Something had shifted in the air, something unspoken. "Hey, Mom," Nathan said softly, almost like he was testing the waters. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, my voice light, trying to match his calm. "What's going on? You're home early." He looked at me then, eyes darting away as if the words were caught in his throat. I could tell something was weighing on him. Nathan had always been a bit of a quiet guy, never the type to spill his emotions all over the place. But today was different. He was pacing, something he hadn't done since he was a kid. It made my stomach twist with a sudden sense of unease. "Can we talk?" His voice was steady, but I could hear a slight tremble in it. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Sit down. You're making me nervous." Nathan didn't immediately sit. Instead, he paced for a moment longer, then stopped in front of the window, his back to me. It felt like time had slowed down. Every little noise seemed amplified, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the distant sound of cars passing by outside. I watched him, my son, a man I thought I knew well. And yet, in that moment, I realized how little I truly understood about what was going on inside him. "Mom," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've been carrying something with me for a long time, and I can't keep it anymore." I felt my heart tighten. This wasn't just a casual confession. It wasn't like he was telling me about a bad grade or a fight with a friend. There was something much heavier in his tone, something that made me realize that whatever he was about to say, it was big. "What do you mean?" I asked, standing now, my hands instinctively moving to my hips, trying to keep my own nerves in check. Nathan took a deep breath, and for a moment, I saw him look over his shoulder at me, his face a mask of uncertainty. Then he turned back toward the window, like he needed to gather his thoughts before he could face me with the truth. "I didn't want to tell you this, Mom. I didn't want to hurt you," he said. His voice cracked slightly, and I could tell he was struggling. "But I have to. I've been hiding it for years, and it's not just me anymore. I need to be honest. With you." with myself. I stood there, waiting for the storm that I knew was coming. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and I suddenly felt the weight of the silence between us, thick and heavy. "Tell me," I urged, my voice soft but firm. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Nathan nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, and then he finally turned to face me. His expression was a mixture of guilt and relief, as if saying it out loud was the only way to release whatever had been suffocating him for so long. "I'm gay, Mom." The words hung in the air between us, and for a split second, everything inside me froze. My heart raced, my mind scrambled for a response, but for the life of me, I couldn't find the words. It wasn't shock exactly. It wasn't even surprise, though I had never seen it coming. It was more like the moment you realize a picture you've been staring at for years isn't quite as you thought it was, that there's something more to it than you ever imagined. It wasn't that Nathan's truth made him any less my son, but it was like I was suddenly seeing him in a new light. And I didn't know yet whether that light would illuminate the parts of him I already knew or cast shadows over things I hadn't yet understood. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. The air in the room seemed to grow warmer, and I realized I hadn't spoken in what felt like an eternity. "I'm still your son, Mom," Nathan said quickly, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I just need you to know. I need you to know me." And there it was, the truth he couldn't carry anymore. It was fragile, and in that moment, it felt like it might slip right through my fingers, like something precious I had to hold on to with both hands. I took a step toward him, then another, until I was standing right in front of him. His eyes were wide, full of hope and fear, and I reached up to gently touch his arm. "I know, Nathan," I said softly, "and I love you. I love you more than anything in this world. Nothing will ever change that." And in that simple moment, something shifted. Something beautiful and painful and raw. Something that would stay with both of us for years to come. The days that followed that afternoon were strangely quiet, not the usual kind of quiet where everything feels peaceful and settled. No, this was the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a thick fog, where even the smallest noise feels too loud, too sharp. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was different. My son and I had always had an easy rhythm between us, but now there was this new space between us. He was still coming over, still spending time in the same old ways, but something had shifted. I could tell he was waiting for me to say something more, to ask questions or maybe to somehow fill in the gaps of what he told me. But I didn't have the answers right away. All I had was a jumble of thoughts, of emotions I wasn't sure how to process. I was trying to reconcile the boy I had raised with the man he had become. I kept telling myself that I had to let this moment breathe. We both needed space to come to terms with this new chapter in our lives. But still, every time I looked at him, I felt the weight of unspoken words pressing down on me. It wasn't until the following weekend, when he invited me to go with him to a small cafe he liked in town, that I finally found the courage to speak. It wasn't planned, no carefully prepared speech or big sit-down. It was just a quiet morning, the two of us sitting across from one another in a booth by the window, the early morning light spilling over everything like it always had. We had been chatting about trivial things at first, the kind of small talk that fills space but means little. Work, the weather, a show we had both watched. But underneath it all, I could feel the tension, like we were both just waiting for the right moment to break the silence. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. "So, Nathan," I began, my voice low, "careful. How are you really doing? I mean, after everything we talked about." His eyes flickered, and for a second, I thought he might look away, as if he wasn't ready to dive back into it. But he didn't. Instead, he met my gaze, his brow furrowing slightly. "I don't know, Mom. I guess I'm okay." He hesitated, then added, "It feels like it's been years, but I never really said it out loud before. You know? I nodded slowly. I did know. It had to have been a heavy weight to carry, one that had shaped so much of his life in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. You've carried it all this time, I said softly. I can't imagine how exhausting that must have been for you. Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It was an old habit, one he picked up when he was a kid and didn't know what else to do with his hands. I could see the vulnerability in him, the way his guard was still up, even though he was trying to be open with me. It hurt my heart a little, but I didn't push. Instead, I reached across the table, my hand just resting on top of his. A simple gesture, nothing fancy, but I hoped it would let him know I was here, really here, with him in this moment. You don't have to have all the answers, Nathan. We're figuring this out together, okay? He looked down at my hand on his, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe relief, maybe gratitude, but it was gone so quickly that I wondered if I had imagined it. Thanks, Mom, he said, his voice small. I wasn't sure how you'd take it. I didn't want you to feel disappointed in me. Or, I don't know, worried. I squeezed his hand, giving him a reassuring smile. You're my son. You're the same Nathan you've always been. This doesn't change anything. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Slowly, over the course of the next few weeks, we began to find our way back to each other. Not in the same way we had been before, but in a deeper way, I think. Our conversations became more honest, more open. There were moments of silence, yes, but they were no longer filled with tension. They were just moments to breathe, to let our thoughts settle. One Saturday afternoon, he came over to help me with a project I had been putting off for months, organizing the attic. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was something that allowed us to be together without feeling like we had to talk constantly. As we sifted through boxes of old books, knick-knacks, and clothes, we fell into a comfortable rhythm. I wasn't trying to force anything. I wasn't looking for more revelations. I just wanted to be with my son in whatever way he needed me. Mom, Nathan said, lifting an old photo album from one of the boxes. His voice sounded distant, like he was lost in thought. I glanced over at him as he flipped through the pages. There were pictures of me as a young woman, of him as a child, moments captured in time that had somehow survived the years. I remember this day, he said, pointing to a photo of himself and me at the park when he was about 7. I smiled, nodding. I remember that too. You were so happy that day, I said. You ran around with your friends for hours. Nathan didn't say anything for a while. He just stared at the photo, his fingers tracing the edges of the page. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he added, I wish I could have told you back then. I wish I could have told you sooner. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I had suspected for a while. It wasn't something I had wanted to admit, but I'd seen the signs. It wasn't that I had any problem with it. It was just that, as a mother, I had always hoped to protect my child from the world's judgment. I had feared that he might feel rejected or lost in the process. But in that moment, as I looked at the young man sitting across from me, holding on to his past so carefully, I realized something important. He hadn't been hiding from me all these years. He had been hiding from himself, and the only thing that had ever mattered was that he finally found the courage to be who he truly was. I reached over and placed my hand on his again, this time not for reassurance, but for solidarity. It's okay, Nathan, I said softly. You don't have to wish for anything anymore. You're here now, and that's enough. He looked at me then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a true sense of peace in his eyes. It was like the last of the walls had come down, and we were no longer standing on opposite sides of some invisible divide. Thanks, Mom, he said again, but this time there was something different in his voice, something like hope. And I realized with a quiet certainty that we were going to be okay. Whatever the future held, whatever challenges we would face, we were going to face them together. In the silence that followed, I found myself smiling, not because everything had been fixed, but because we were finally able to move forward together. The weeks continued to unfold in a way that felt almost strange to me, slow, steady, and quietly transformative. Life didn't change in any dramatic, overwhelming way. Instead, it shifted in small, almost invisible steps, like the gentle turning of a season. Nathan and I were talking more, sharing more, allowing ourselves to settle into this new understanding. I could feel him opening up in ways he never had before, and I found myself doing the same, almost without realizing it. One afternoon, he invited me to join him on a walk through the old neighborhood. It was a place filled with memories, both sweet and complicated. The sun was warm but not too harsh, the kind of warmth that settles on your shoulders without burden. The trees that lined the sidewalks were taller than I remembered, their branches bending slightly over the road like familiar arms reaching out in welcome. We walked side by side, not speaking at first, just listening to the crunch of leaves beneath our shoes. I noticed the way Nathan kept glancing at the houses we passed, as if looking for pieces of himself in the corners of old lawns and cracked driveways. "Mom," he said gently, breaking the silence, "I didn't just come out to you that day. I also ended a relationship." I slowed my steps, not out of shock, but out of the instinct to give him room to speak without feeling rushed. "I didn't know you were seeing someone," I said, my voice calm, inviting. "That's the thing," he murmured, looking down at the sidewalk. "I didn't let you know. Or anyone, really. I kept everything hidden, even the good parts." There was a sadness in his voice, not sharp or painful, but soft and steady, like something that had been held inside far too long. "What was he like?" I asked. The question came out naturally, surprising even me with how ready I was to hear the answer. Nathan smiled faintly. "Kind," he said, "thoughtful, patient. He understood things about me I didn't even understand myself." I could hear something deeper beneath his words, a tenderness that he was still trying to reconcile with the loss of it. It wasn't a dramatic heartbreak. It was quieter, more personal. The type that settles in the bones. "Why did it end?" I asked softly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Because I wasn't ready to be seen. Not fully, and he deserved someone who was." We walked a little farther, the wind picking up just enough to rustle the branches overhead. I felt something stir in me, a recognition, maybe, of how familiar his words sounded. I had lived a long life, full of choices and mistakes, full of moments where I had hidden myself too. And here was my son, standing in that same space I once had, not knowing how to step out of the shadows. "Nathan," I said finally, "sometimes the timing of our truth isn't wrong. It's just still growing. You weren't ready then, but that doesn't mean you won't be ready soon." He looked at me, his expression thoughtful, as if turning my words over in his mind. "You really believe that?" he asked. "I do," I answered. "More than you know." We turned down a narrow street, one that led to the old community park. The benches were worn from years of sun and use, and children's laughter carried across the grass. The place looked smaller than I remembered, but somehow more peaceful too. We sat together on one of the old benches, watching the world move around us. I could feel the calm settling between us, like we had reached a place that needed no explanation. "Mom," he said quietly after a moment, "I was scared to tell you because I thought you'd think I had hidden too much from you, that I had been someone you didn't really know." I took a slow breath, letting the breeze brush against my face. "You're my son," I said, turning toward him. "I knew you then. I know you now. People grow, Nathan. That's not a betrayal. It's life." He let out a slow sigh, his shoulders releasing tension I didn't even realize he was still carrying. I could see a faint relief fall over him, like a soft glow. "You've always been good at making things make sense," he said with a small smile. I laughed lightly. "No, I've just had more years to figure out what matters and what doesn't." We sat there for a long time, simply sharing the moment. The light changed around us, the shadows stretching slowly across the park. The world didn't feel heavy anymore, not for him, and not for me. Something had settled between us, something firm and warm, like the foundation of a bridge finally finished. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I didn't feel fear or uncertainty. What I felt was connection, real, honest connection, between a mother and a son who were finally learning how to truly see each other. And that, I realized, was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. It's funny how things can change in such subtle ways, without you even realizing it. One day you wake up, and everything feels like it's been the same for years, and then the next, without any big dramatic shift, you find yourself standing in a new place with a new perspective. That was where I found myself now. It had been several months since that afternoon Nathan had told me his truth, since that conversation that had opened up so much between us. We had learned to navigate our new reality with patience and understanding. The silence that once hung between us now felt more like a comfort, like a shared space where words weren't always necessary. Our bond wasn't just surviving. It was growing in ways that felt deeper and more genuine. There was a softness in the way we interacted now, a mutual respect that wasn't there before. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we were finally seeing each other in the light of honesty. It wasn't just a one-time thing. It was something that had reshaped the very core of who we were together. It wasn't all easy, of course. Life had a way of throwing curveballs, even in the quietest moments. There were still questions, things we hadn't yet figured out. Nathan was still figuring out what being his true self meant, and I was still learning how to support him in the ways he needed. It wasn't a perfect process, but it was ours, and it was real. It was a Saturday afternoon when Nathan came over to the house, just like old times. This time, though, I could tell he was carrying something more, an energy I couldn't quite place. He had that look in his eyes, the same look he'd had the day he told me about his sexuality. The look that said he was about to share something important. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, when I heard the familiar creak of the door, the soft thud of his boots as he stepped in. When I turned around, I saw him standing in the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets, the same way he always used to stand when he was nervous. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice a little off, like there was something he wanted to say but couldn't find the words just yet. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, putting down the knife and wiping my hands on the dish towel. "You okay?" Nathan nodded but didn't come any closer, instead staying rooted at the door, his eyes darting between me and the floor. I could feel his hesitation in the air, thick like fog. "What's going on?" I asked gently, giving him the space to speak, not wanting to rush him. "I've been thinking a lot, Mom," he began, still not meeting my eyes. "About everything. About us. About me." I could feel a lump forming in my throat. I didn't know where this was going, but I could tell it was big. He was standing on the edge of something deep, and I didn't want to interrupt him, but I also didn't want to leave him hanging. So I simply nodded, gesturing for him to continue. "After we talked, after you said you loved me, no matter what, I realized something," he said, finally looking up at me, though his gaze was hesitant. "I realized that I need to take the next step in my life, in who I am." My heart thudded, and I stepped forward, closer to him. My instincts as a mother kicked in, but I didn't know if I should say something, if I should ask him to elaborate, or if I should just wait. The silence stretched out between us again, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy. It was full of expectation, like we both knew something significant was coming. Nathan took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak. "I think it's time to tell my dad." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I felt a sharp sting in my chest. I had been expecting this conversation, but I hadn't realized how much it would hit me until now. Nathan had always been close with his father, though in recent years there had been a growing distance. His dad wasn't a bad man. Far from it. He was a good man, a solid provider, the kind of father who would do anything for his kids. But I had always sensed a certain reluctance when it came to deeper emotional connections, especially when it came to talking about Nathan's personal life. Maybe it was a generational thing, or maybe it was just who he was. But Nathan had always seemed to hide parts of himself from his father, out of fear that he wouldn't understand. I didn't know how his father would react. My stomach twisted at the thought. I knew that once this truth was shared, there was no going back. Nathan would never be able to untell him, and there was no way to predict how it would change their relationship. I think he needs to know, Nathan continued, his voice quieter now, more serious. I've been hiding it from him for so long, Mom. I don't want to keep lying to him anymore. It's just, I don't know how he's going to react. I took a deep breath, sitting down at the kitchen table to steady myself. This was a moment I had